Good morning.
Hello, Peter. So I just have to text Emily. Boom, very good. Yeah, in the last conversation, there was a lot of talk about coding, and I completely forgot you were there. You're not on video, so sometimes I ignored you, not on purpose. But it's very exciting that we can try to do something, all of us, coding-wise.
Oh, definitely.
So Adam is not coming on the call today. Let's see what he wrote here. He says, been in bed for 24 hours with some heavy cold/flu. No energy to join the call today. Unfortunately, we'll watch the recording. So I guess we have to forgive him.
I hope he doesn't have anything serious.
Yeah, no, he's a strong Swede. He should be all right. But with that many kids, there will be things happening, of course.
I'll have to leave a few minutes early today for elder care transport.
Okay. That's fair enough.
Hi, Mark.
So now the problem is, Mark, we have to remember which argument we had earlier so we can continue it. Got to keep track of these.
Actually, while we're waiting to kick off, I have an actual practical thing, because I know we were discussing about transcription things, and over in the Tin Box forum, there's some poor chap who's Korean, and he wants to watch. He's watching some Vimeos that have been done at some community meetings, but he wants closed captions, which I don't think Vimeo does, or you have to pay for. And I did think, well, perhaps if he watched them, and there must be some of these things, like if he fed it into Otter AI or something, perhaps. I'm just trying to think, putting myself in somebody else's shoes as a non, if non-native English speaker, what might be actually be useful.
Captions in Korean.
Sorry, he's the guy's South Korean, so I imagine he's a Korean speaker, or so he's not a sort of strong first language thing. And I'm just thinking, well, if your starting point is you've got access to a Vimeo, which you didn't create, I was thinking, well, I'm just thinking of practical ways that they could get themselves probably a decent AI transcript rather than a closed caption, which they could probably then also translate if it helped them.
I don't know about the transcript in Vimeo, but I had to look at YouTube today because it's taking a while to get all the expert interviews I've done transcribed. Obviously, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I've been using some of the YouTube one, and it's actually pretty good.
I know. I mean, I realize I'm so old-fashioned. I've discovered that now it's so old-fashioned to watch any video without closed captions on, if I'm to believe the news.
Oh, hang on. What's Raphael playing with there?
The camera, by the looks of it.
Clearly, we need to turn ourselves into. Which one is it? Which 7 is it? Don't keep it a secret.
It's the 3. A73.
Very nice.
I'm still learning how to use it properly.
Right, all the pixels.
I'm showing off too now.
All right. Yeah.
This.
Are we going big now? Okay then.
This is. Oh really? Okay.
Is that now called big? I remember when video cameras really were big. Break your shoulder.
This is for the. I'm going to record the theater here at the end of the year.
All right. Yeah,
so yeah. I'm learning how to use those two.
Yeah.
This is not a video camera. This is only stills. It does 1080 video, which is completely useless for me, but it's 42 megapixels. So when I print out these books of Edgar, 2-page spreads this big, they still look tack sharp. This is a video camera.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is the Fuji one. The color science with Fuji stuff is just amazing. 100 XD something or other.
Right now, what I wanted to get is the cameras that print the photos. The
Polaroids.
They have ones. Yeah, but the newer ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Polaroid has one, but they have some other brands as well, because it's nice to take a picture and have it printed already. You can put it on a wall or send it to somebody.
It's like living in the future.
Exactly.
Raphael, for the first time in this area, I completely disagree with you. It's nice to have a little side printer, but for me, I'm such a snob when it comes to print quality. You know, I take my glasses off and stare at every dot. Anyway, we'll have our hang-ups.
42 megapixels. Is that part of the No Pixel Left Behind program?
Raphael and me were looking at cameras, Alan. So, what did you say? No,
I said 42. That's going. It's part of the No Pixel Left Behind program.
Yes. So Adam is not here today. He is unwell, which is not good.
Sorry to hear that.
So on my side of the world, I'm stressing a little bit trying to finish the book. I'm waiting for day 2 of the transcripts, and he is slow, but that's because he's good and he's being responsible. So I'll get that today. That's fine. But I'm also stressing like a mad donkey about my PhD. My final meeting with my advisors is Thursday week. And by then it's supposed to be the final piece, and I haven't even finished my expert interviews. So today I'm probably gonna have to try to get a few more, but I've decided not to transcribe them. I'll just do it myself, because then I only write down the relevant sentences, part of the analysis. So that's fine. So that's why my head is a little bit elsewhere.
If there was any consolation on my submission day, someone woke me up because I was fast asleep, being woken up, and I'd driven into the lab and I had fallen asleep, my head on the keyboard.
That should be your avatar. The head on.
Don't worry, they only pick winners. Come on.
You know, PhD students should have imprints of keyboards on their foreheads. But anyway, other than that, things are all good on this end. Stressing a little bit with Jacob finishing author and reader, because I have to go into commercial mode, not, oh, can I change that bit mode? And
Yes.
yeah, but I look forward to moving forward. And the reason I'm mentioning my PhD is not just because, oh, poor me, overstressed. It's also, you know, while doing some of the details, I also return to the big picture. And if I have one new section that I wrote this weekend called, is hypertext the right approach for academia? And of course, the answer is no, not straight out of the box anyway. So digital text will have to be rethought in many ways. We can't just slavishly go after connected nodes. That's not everything. Of course, nobody here would necessarily think so. But it was nice to be able to have a little section in the document say, just, Raphael, stop showing off that you can wear shorts. Have you any idea what it would cost to heat?
It's 35 degrees
to be able to wear
here.
shorts inside?
So just think, soon you'll be able to sell Dr. Hegland's patent scriptorium.
Yeah.
With a nice oldie worldy label.
I don't know what it is, but you all must sign up.
No, I mean your author app, you know.
In 3 weeks' time, you'll be free, Frode.
To an extent. Oh yeah, well, no, it's not like that. I mean, that's what's so messy. After that, basically what's going to happen, I don't know how much you guys know about this weird process in the UK. It's actually interesting because of its bullshit. So the final date is the 29th of December forever. And then what actually happens is I don't have to give them anything. But then when we come back from break, they'll say, oh, you're supposed to submit. Can you send us something? So then I do. And, you know, and that's like the final drafts. So after my meeting in 2 weeks with my supervisors, they're going to tear everything to shreds. And then I have to spend the entire Christmas period not Christmasing at all. And then judging by Mark's journey through this, then there's the Viva, which happens in a few months. Then there's this.
No, before that, there's the, can you send us the document you already sent us 6 times? I seem to have lost it somewhere from both your examiners. So there's a good deal of that before you get to the Viva.
So that's all.
Then you start all over again.
So Alan,
level.
You're on holiday.
Yeah, Thanksgiving.
You know that's over, right?
Yeah, I haven't really been on holiday. I was trying to figure it out. The reference. I been working. I'm curious about the PhD program and how it interacts with future of text. I mean, is there as much of a motivation to keep it going once you have the PhD? Is that and with the focus on the commercialization of reader and author,
I know
how
that
do you?
I know that I insulted you inadvertently
Oh,
a couple of weeks ago, but now you're insulting me inadvertently. Are you saying I've been working on my PhD for 10 years?
No, of course not. I'm not saying this was a product of the PhD. I wonder if it's like, well, you're gonna get the PhD, and then you're in a sort of a swamp of new motivations and priorities, right? Because one priority has evacuated.
It's normally a swamp of exhaustion, actually.
So
Exhaustion.
I can answer that question wonderfully. So what I got out of my PhD is Mark Anderson, primarily, and Dave Millard, my active supervisor, and to an extent, Chris Guttridge was also at Southampton, but we disagree on a lot, but it's still very useful. That's what I got. I thought I would get structure, but PhD has no structure. I didn't know that. But anyway, that's in the process. So what I hope to use the PhD for is basically, hopefully if I do get it, it'll help sell the software, because then the story will be, because I did actually start the software after I started the PhD. So I can honestly do PR around PhD student doesn't like any of the available software, makes his own. So that's a little cutesy thing. So I'll probably, and also when people go to the website, it's for academics, Frode Hegland, PhD. It looks a little better, but that's it. But
it's 3 years fighting for the right to be allowed to color outside the lines, basically.
I spent a little bit more than 3 years. But I did have two.
Me too, but let's not go there.
I had two big interruptions. But I wish Raphael could come back, because the next thing is about the community. I know, I'll just say it anyway. So Alan, because of you and Raphael primarily, I will be focusing more on the community. I think community building and software building can go very well in parallel, as long as it's really clear how they're related. So that. Yeah, so that's what we have discussed earlier anyway.
So that's awesome. And on that note, on the community building, I think it's important to, last time we ended out asking, why are we doing this? What's this about? If we're talking about like a long-term institution, and of course I don't mean 300 years, but like a decade. It's important to differentiate ourselves from a lot of the other groups that are out there that are talking about the same things. I mean, there's a future thinkers, there's a future of coding.
Right.
There's a lot.
I can, yeah. I'm sorry. Also, Raphael, when you had to go, Alan was asking about future stuff. I said, starting January, I'll be more focused on the community than before, and that's largely because of you and Alan being so involved. You're frozen, but okay,
Awesome.
at least you can hear us, right? Yeah. In terms of differentiating, Alan, one thing I have to highlight, I'm not sure if I told you, I'm not sure if you were there. Ismail Sergelden has got a little bit of money for me to do the future of text interviews. So the world leaders have done so far will be transcribed and edited, and we'll do a volume. We'll do more. It'll be 10 plus. And what he is thinking about is we do this out of his network initially. So there is support also for spreading that word, so to speak. And it'll be interesting to see how we all decide how the book should be. And then, by the way, he wants that published with a publisher. So part of the budget is for us to buy the first 200 copies or something, so that the publisher will at least break even. But then what he wants to do, and I'm not sure how it fits into what we are talking about here, is the future of text interviews, scientists or artists. He wants to have topics. So,
I love that.
But it has to be really carefully thought about, because we have scientists and artists and all of that in our main series of books anyway. So I think us as a community have to decide how these connect. Because that also goes to your question, Alan, how do we differentiate ourselves?
Yeah.
I don't see them necessarily, being in conflict, though. I mean, I quite understand how having a sort of a more curated, more formal sort of stream of things will help the likes of Ismail who want to use it it probably more in their workspace. So this is something formal that people recognize, despite the fact that actually when you look to the wider edges of it, there's a much more diffuse and inclusive part. So I still think that sounds all good.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting at is not to attack the other groups or anything like that. It's more just a recognition that right now, probably relating, I would say definitely relating to the pandemic. I know that I wouldn't be able to join these meetings if I was going into work, right? So
definitely.
there's been an explosion of interest in all these kinds of groups. It's kind of a primordial soup, and so it makes it difficult for a person to decide which opportunity to take. Do I go to Interintellect? Do I go to one of these other groups? Which one can I be a part of? And so that's where the motivation of distinguishing what this group is versus others. And it doesn't necessarily mean approach as much as like, for instance, there's going to be one group that is almost grounded in idealism and solving the world's problems, right? And so the talk is about epistemology and as existentialism, and that's for some people that's what I want to talk about, and for others I'll be like, it's not really my thing. I want something more functional, Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean. I guess the vibe.
Right. So to comment back on that, I think a very large part of that is what Peter wrote in the chat.
The chat.
Peter wrote, why not aim for 300 plus years community longevity? I think that's really a good idea because, first of all, I have to do another sanity check. Have you all finally watched Hamilton?
I have.
Alan's turned his screen off.
We blew Alan out of the room.
many times.
Many times. That's what I want to hear. Right.
And I just, go ahead.
No, please. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
I see. I did, based on your recommendation, watch Oblivion, and I liked it a lot. That was a lot better than I was. I typically avoid movies that have Tom Cruise on the cover.
He played Tom Cruise though, didn't he? When he was at that little private place with a baseball cap.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay. The reason I'm mentioning Hamilton is he wrote America into existence, along with a few supporting cast, obviously. But in the song "Dear Theodosia," where he is singing to his son Philip, unborn, and Aaron Burrs singing to his daughter Theodosia, same name as his wife. They're saying, we'll build a strong foundation. We'll make it right for you. We'll bleed and fight for you. The whole idea that the children will grow up with the nation, right?
Yeah.
So even in a loving to a child song, they managed to have the beautiful ideas of, we have to create the foundations. We have to make the structure of a nation. Even earlier, when there's all kinds of excitement, he talks about, there's the shooting and the fighting in the streets, but we have to look at our nation's financials, right? It's like, what's that doing in a musical? Same thing here. The reason I'm so absolutely goddamn glued to PDF is for the reason Peter said. I want this community to be able to outlast all of us. And I want the earliest record of our work to be accessible. YouTube will maybe be around in, let's say, 500 years. PDFs printed on, acid-free paper hidden away in a library, most definitely. So if we make that part of our core mission, not for our ego, but for the fact that if we live such a community, then that could maybe be useful for others as well.
So I have a little trouble thinking like 300, 500 years into the future from now, because of all of the current developments that we've been having, and it's normal for the curve to go faster and faster. So if we were talking 1700s, I would say of course it's going to be around for another 300 years, books and things like that. But it's easy, thinking back, but it's hard thinking forward. Like for me, like 500 years from now, I want to be like that Black Mirror episode where San Junipero, I'm connected to a server. I can create the realities that I want based on what I want to experience, and books don't matter. And I'm connected to the network, and I know I have all the information that I need at any given time. I don't know. It seems like it always seems like science fiction, but the more we see news, the more science fiction becomes reality.
Sure. Let me just bounce off the Hamilton analogy. In that sense, and what I was talking about, the original prompt of Future of Text as a group, that group is sort of like the guys in the bar, complaining about King George. That's kind of where we're at, right? That thing wasn't around for 300 years, right? But but what they started and what they pulled in other people to get motivated about led to something that is lasted for 300 years. So that's the thing. But even I would even say that we're a step before the bar, really a step before Hamilton showing up, right? Because we don't know what our King George is, right? Maybe it's hyperlinks, maybe it's categorization. I don't know, but we're still kind of figuring out, hey, why isn't this as easy as it should be?
Mm-hmm. I like to think instead of thinking of specific apps or systems that we have right now, like hypertext, YouTube, things like that. I like to always take a couple steps back and look at the foundation, because the foundation doesn't change as often as does everything else that comes with the foundation, right? So if we talk about, either text as, as a means of communication, and then we're still going to be communicating, it doesn't matter in what way, and then see how we interact with, the content and context and all these other things. So it doesn't matter if we're in the singularity or if we're still using books, or if, we have, YouTube, but these things will remain as a foundation. So I like to think in that way.
Yeah. And I love focusing on the sort of the timeless problems and recognizing how the timeless component has mutated sort of a thing that used to work, right? Like once we have this scale that we've never experienced before as a species, these problems crop up in significant ways. To just do hopefully a quick diatribe, I realized that in reading about Web3 a little bit and trying to parse some of the enthusiasm behind it, it feels a lot like AI in the 50s, right? Where the ideas were good, and the ideas actually bore fruit 50 years later. When all the other pieces were in play, but the enthusiasm there overlooked the timeless conditions, the things that are easy to overlook, the parts of us that are almost intrapersonal. So it overlooks the complexity of words and the complexity of thought, and so it could do, even back then, really good prediction when it came to physics and physical things outside of humans. But it took a much longer time to get even to where we're at now, which is still not what they were hoping for back then. And I see the same kind of thing in Web3, where there's all this enthusiasm about the core new ideas, or I should just say blockchain. But they've overlooked the fantastically complex, pluralistic parts of language and communication. So I bring that back around to this group in that I think that we're not just, we're non-convex. We're interested in everything. But in a way, it's like text as a form of communication in synchronicity with how we learn through text, right? And that seems to be at least just, I think I could categorize most of our conversations as falling into that frame of reference. Does that make sense? Does that follow, or agree or disagree?
Yeah, that follows a lot. I have some comments, but Mark was first and then Peter.
Oh, sorry.
No, and as to Alan's last, I'd agree. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking in terms of projecting the future. One of the things also I think we're doing is, aside from whether anyone can listen to this conversation as it is in the future, that'd be nice. But I think, in a sense, the legacy is thinking about actually, it is foundational stuff. It's the glue between the things. So it's fine to think about what might be, but if I look back at what this community has done in the last year, 2 years or something, one output of which, for instance, is visual meta, if slightly aside from the thing, but it's this sort of thing saying, look, it's part of this thing of understanding that, there are many things we could do and many things we want to do, but, there are some sort of constraints. And rather than just completely spitball about what might be, doing things that actually nudge the needle forward, and also sort of recording some sense of why we're doing what we're doing, even if it's imperfect, because that is useful to know. So because you can say, hi, Brandon, you can say in N years' time, okay, so that's why something that just seems totally ludicrous in the future, at a future point, to come back, okay, well, that's what they thought and that's why they thought it. And it may not occur now, but I can now make more sense of why we got to where we are. So I think that's a tremendously useful thing to do.
Randall, just a quick intro of the last few minutes. Alan has asked about what's the point of this community, in a good way, of course. And, I'm finishing my PhD, very stressed, the book, stress, blah, blah, blah. But I'm making a commitment from January onward to spend more time with practical community things. I think it is very important, and I'm very grateful to be with you guys. So, the question is a bit, how do we differentiate ourselves from other groups and so on? And Peter wrote in chat, hang on, it's nice. It says, why not aim for 300 plus years of community longevity? I think that is a core thing for us. That's why I'm so hot on PDFs and printed output, because it's secure over time, plus all the amazing interactions we can do. So that's where you're coming in, and Peter has raised his hand for the next bit.
Yes. Also, I think going forward, we have to be almost new to myself, but we have to take into consideration the potential of software tools that we create, augmenting our ability to move the community forward, and the fact that given the potential of emulation and future systems, that software to live forward far longer than we ever imagined that it would be useful. Because yes, there'll be a newer version of JavaScript coming out, and there'll be newer browser systems and all, but tools that we write today can run in emulators on generation upon generation of future hardware, so that in 5,000 years, people might be looking at code that was originally written in the 1980s and still be dependent on it, because it'll be easier to just take the environment it was written in and bring it forward than start from scratch and rebuild everything in whatever their tool du jour is at the time.
Yeah, it's something to think about, but don't forget, even accessing Flash. If you look at 9/11, you look at CNN's website, some of their most important information is lost because it was in Flash. I just wanted to read a really short bit from my thesis that I just wrote and skim through it for this relevance. This is an answer to Alan's point about, should we do the kind of high-minded talk about the philosophical aspect, or should we build something? And Brandel, of course, we started the conversation with Hamilton. Let's not forget, Hamilton and his buddies didn't just write America, they did things too. I mean, one of the things, he stole British cannons. How literal can you get, to work for something? So a little bit of text affordances. I wrote that readability can be conveniently divided into navigation in a document, clear readability of the text the reader wants to be, and connections to external sources. So then I go through a list of when certain things were invented and so on. And then I end with, now, of course, with digital text, we can throw it all away and start fresh. And of course, following that up with, that would be a pretty stupid idea. But we're at a point now where we can decide how to look at these old affordances, because in a digital document, we can have so many of them at the same time. So I think going forward to whatever things we're doing, yes, we need the whole saving the world attitude, and that's absolutely worth discussing. But also we have to build a thing and realize it's rubbish and then change it and build the next thing. I think these things have to work in parallel or intertwined. Yeah, Mark, hand.
Yep. It's slightly rested to achieve my last, but listening to Peter's last point, and I'm thinking, gosh, and I spent a lot of time looking at effectively software or things that were software projects from the sort of 80s, 90s. And the one thing that's missing is what problem they were really solving. So you see so in fact, what you see is the remains of whatever survives. And apart from the fact that it was new at the time, it's really quite hard to understand really what they were doing, not least because without them describing the context in which they were doing it, you know, because it's not your context, time moves on. So I think a really useful thing, and this is sort of an interesting aspect of the text. Yes, people will go off and build funky new things, and that's great. But drawing the threads of why we're doing it, and even if it's people doing it just because they want to, and that's fine. But I mean, there will be things we're saying, no, what this is doing, this is the bridging the gap between this and that. You know, if somebody were to say now, there will be, for whatever reason, just because there will be no PDF, say, in 10 years' time, then we need to start thinking now, or there will be no paper books, you know. And I think that's one of the sort of bridging narratives that it's the forum like this can help put into place, because that then allows all the other nuggets, you know, and the other bits of history and things coming from other places to slot together more neatly, because often it's a historical frame that's missing. And that doesn't mean we have to have it doesn't have to be opinionated. It's more a statement of fact. This is genuinely what we thought we were doing at the time. Well, we, other people, you know, but these events that are happening were sort of basically trying to do these things. And I think that's a tremendously useful thing for future selves.
Yeah, just one thing to add on. I've been reading the book Metazoa, was reading it a bit last night, and two things so relevant to this. One is before the Cambrian, as Alan kind of referred to earlier, little creatures started to move, right? And that's because, you know, they had to move towards food and away from predators. But no creature on land that moves isn't bilateral, as in that doesn't have an equally split body. It just hasn't happened, right? So I'm thinking about the VR thing of how to inhabit the VR space. That physical form involved how we live in this space. So I just thought that was really interesting, that it's so fundamental that, you know, to move forward and have control, we got split down the middle like that. But the other thing, which I think is really fundamental to our work, is and I'm really embarrassed, I forget the word right now. Parasite, that's it, parasite, thank you. No, not a parasite, the one that it's almost symbiotic. What do you call an animal that lives off another, but the other one doesn't mind? Not
symbiote.
No, not symbiosis, but not like a fish would have a little sucker fish or something.
Parasite?
Is it parasite?
It's not a parasite. No, it's not a parasite.
But anyway, you know what I mean.
the host and parasite, right? You have the host. And
No,
the,
some of them it's helpful. It's like you have the alligators and you have.
I'm going to get the book.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a fungus and you have an algae coming
Really
in,
big
it's
point.
broadly a
Really
symbiont.
big point.
But, all sorts of terms are available. But it's interesting, actually, when I think about, so, you know, but is bilateralism, is that just, you know, in effect an inherited design constraint we lived in, rather than the USB of where we've got to? I mean, you can take that either way, and I don't think we know, because we can't go back to the point where all the alternatives, you know, cease to be. Oh, and there's nothing to say there isn't something living in a swamp right now that's not bilateral, that's, you know, will come and take over. We just don't know.
My suspicion is that it's to do with the instructional simplicity. Having a this but mirrored instruction means that it is less information. Is it commensalism? The parasitism thing that you're looking for? There's the four different.
There's also
kinds of
mutualism,
symbiosis.
which
Right.
big fan of. Yeah, mutualism that's another kind of symbiotic relationship, I guess.
I have double embarrassed myself. It is parasites. So it says here, many flatworms today are parasites on other organisms, and parasitism often makes for simplicity.
Yeah, well, and it's that simplicity. So like that's the the reason why sunflowers grow in a Fibonacci spiral is because it's a simple instruction, and so you see those things not because they're beautiful necessarily, but actually simply because they make for simple and repeatable kind of things. And so that has in turn informed our aesthetics. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say I take a slightly different reading from that because, the book The Shallows saying, oh, because of the internet, people don't read as deep and think as deep and we're all getting stupid. I think it relates a little bit to that because we're modern technological society is so powerful that it doesn't really need any one of us. So in a sense, we are parasites onto that infrastructure, right? So that means that we can be simpler. And I think that is a good thing. We can devote resources elsewhere, but it does make us simpler because we are parasites to it. Just a little weird thing. Anyway, Alan, I'm afraid that went a little bit away from your point of the specialness of this group, but we really need to steal the cannons and make it simple.
Oh, I think we froze.
No, I managed to shut up for once.
Oh, I see. Well, I think to split this conversation just a bit, Randall's point about the simplicity, I hope I pronounced your name right, the simplicity of instructions or the rule book, I think is something that applies a lot to, yes, physical forms, but also the complexity, the mess we're in right now. And this is becoming more of my particular cross to bear, I guess, or something, which is just at the enterprise level, how difficult it is to take a simple step forward. Has a lot to do with the abundance of on-ramps, if you will. Like there's a situation of too many documents or too many instructions about the same thing. And so then you feel like you have to either read them all or some contradict each other. And you have to get through them just to get to the point of saying, well, that wasn't a complete answer. That wasn't what I was looking for, right? This relates to the future of text in the sense that as I mentioned, the type of text that we're talking about is the text that has to do with communication, collaboration, learning. Specifically, even the type of learning that's possible now at the scale that we're at creates these new situations that have been around but are quickly kind of growing out of scale. And that would be, I think one example of it is called epistemic trespassing these days, which is something I identify with quite a bit, wherein you want to learn a new domain, let's say AI or blockchain, and maybe it's not even that conscious. Maybe you just start to, like I have with Web3, hear all of these new words propagate all around you in your bubble. And they all seem like totally different universes, right? And after a while, after you start to learn some of a certain angle, a certain artery, then these other things that seem so complex and separate all fall in line, and you're actually dealing with something very simple. And at the end of this, I don't know if you guys have experienced this path, but this is my standard experience from learning CSS, from learning JavaScript to machine learning. It always starts out overwhelming. Like, how could there be so many names? And then at the end, you're like, oh, these are just redundancies. These are naming the same thing, but from someone that was making maybe a slightly different point, and so they came up with a different name. I say all of that to be like that. That's one of the more ground level problems I'm interested in solving. you know. I sent you, Frode, on Twitter an example of something from a code editor that was almost like a reverse graph. It's very similar to what you're building, where you, if you have highlighted a bit of code, and side note, I think personally the code editors of today are the text editors of tomorrow, and it's always been that way. But if you highlight a bit of code, you get perhaps a naturally generated sentence explaining what that code does. And it's a fantastic little featurelet enhancement. Seeing something like that in the words that we use in everyday, in PDFs, in everyday conversation, especially around new domains, would be one example of reversing the tide of this, well, I guess you call it information overload. Okay, stopping for now. Anyone else, please comment.
I have a comment, because it makes me think back to something actually Fred and I were discussing in our little sort of Southampton group this morning about. I was raising the thing about sort of, and I don't know if this is a formal term or not, but what I think of as engagement teaching, where you're learning a subject, where what you're actually learning is what the subject calls itself, what it does, how it explains itself in the world, mainly so that you can interact with that discipline or that trade or whatever in a useful way, and if nothing else, have some sense of understanding and respect for what it does. And should you need that, especially if it's something you realize you'll never learn for yourself because you just don't have that sort of a brain, that you can go and have a sensible conversation and know the words to use and things. And that's maybe another part of the thing that I think we're sort of in, almost by accident doing, is drawing some threads across the piece. You know, speaking back to Alan's point about, you know, there are all these words, and then suddenly they begin to sort of coalesce. You realize, okay, these are basically different facets of the same thing. So I think that there's an interesting aspect there, just gently drawing the mappings in to allow people an easier path through the sort of soup of multiple choices.
Well, I mean, one of the things that's a bit of an elephant in the room is most of these problems can be solved if someone just takes the time to write it down nicely. Right, so I'm not trying to say that as a cop-out, but any good introductory presentation is obviously worth its weight in gold. Mm. So I think that's definitely an important human.
There's a yes and no to that.
No, yeah, and of course, but I'd like to hear your no to that.
I also think that the introduction to any given topic is the most important point of contact with any subject or any theory or anything, because that basically makes or breaks how you will interact, even if you will choose to continue to interact with that thing. That's why I always prefer workshops that are, or at least I like to share things related to a foundation level as an introduction, because after people have an introduction, they can choose their own path. But then the experience they have determines if they're going to continue or not. I mean, we can think of school. Like if we have a teacher that is incredible for a topic that we don't really care about, it makes us interested in that topic. I've had a horrible maths teacher all my life, so I hate math because I've never had people that presented math to me in such a way that was interesting or that made me curious. But some other topics I was extremely interested in. So I think foundational knowledge or introductional knowledge is I think one of the most important aspects of presenting information to people.
I'll give you a scenario, and maybe it's unique. Hopefully there's a pattern behind it that we can identify, because I don't think it's unique, but it doesn't, these kinds of things don't get talked about much because they are so by nature fractal and sinewy. Okay, so here's the situation. I have a customer, a client who, and so I work at Twilio. They need to do SMS in India, and they've been told that they can't. India has a lot of regulations, so a lot of things aren't possible, right? And if you look through the docs, they'll say, here's all the things that you kind of can't do, right? And the descriptions are great, but my situation is a little bit more like a calculator. I need an answer to a specific scenario, right? I need to know that it's, my scenario in this case would be, SMS going one way just for notifications and some other caveats and scenario situations. And I need a straight answer is this possible or not? And instead I have to go through all of the other documentation about telephony in India, which is a great introduction, but it's not what I need. Does that make sense? Is there a pattern, perhaps even a phrase for that?
Google.
Like I'm not trying to introduce myself to a new academic study. I have a functional situation to resolve.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so taking it back half a step, Doug obviously had a system he called journal. And he felt having a handbook of any given field, that's his terminology, handbook, is really, really important. There should be an always up-to-date handbook as a guide to any given field. That was his ideal. And with a journal, you put in a document, you have a version 2, just put the same document in, it automatically becomes version 2, and they know about each other. So that's really, really important. But there is definitely an amount of curating going on, putting these things in. So the kind of issue you're talking about, Alan, is probably not going to be without the, at the top of my head, it may be in there, or it may be on Reddit or some discussion group or something. That there will be these things distributed and you have to search for it some way. But I do feel that, for instance, in our community, we should have a way in. If we start by that being a web page, fine. But it really needs to be curated by us and saying, like these calls, I now put the chat transcript into the comment or whatever thing on YouTube. We can do more. I've been very careful not to editorialize, but since we're now taking it up a notch, maybe for next year, at the end of the call, we try to all agree on a sentence to put in the title. Like, today we talked about, or we could be like friends, the one about, however we want. Because just going back by dates is near useless, other than you're a historian and one of us becomes famous, right? Brandel?
I was going to say one of the challenges with discovering a discipline like you're mentioning, Alan, is that there are all kinds of weird and often perverse incentives in place in terms of people producing documentation and having value systems that reflect either wanting to be able to capitalize on things or wanting to be able to say that things are complicated. A lot of people's in sort of emotional investment is tied up in believing that CSS is incredibly complicated, either because they don't know it or because they do. And so it is actually pretty difficult to get that from any given individual unless you can trust them for some reason. One of the things that, the promise of Google was that the search results would be able to do that. So PageRank, if you've heard about how PageRank works, it's fascinating. What's it called? I don't have it, but it's the wandering teleporting drunk is the way that Lada Adam explains it. And the mechanism is that you randomly follow links within a page to see which appear to be high value connections, and then you if you get stuck, you teleport to another random part in the graph, and based on the way that all of those sort of link follows flow as a result of the totality of the web network, that is the sort of the ultimate edge ranking, where that was the initial kind of representation of it, of what Google was doing. And that's useful, but one of the things that is not useful from a human perspective is how opaque the calculation and understanding of what those sort of formations, those lattice networks are. And so, one of the things I'm glad that you're interested in the transcript, Frode, for these discussions. I discovered a while ago that those automatic transcripts, the actual text is available in its totality, and so I wrote a bookmarklet that takes all of the words and then generates the keyword list and then turns that into a word cloud. So you just click on a YouTube video and you get a word cloud. And one of the things that was interesting to me about that is that YouTube, whether or not they do, they definitely have the capability to consult that transcript to be able to make recommendations. But what they don't do is provide a manner in which they explain the way the determinations from that transcript have been used to recommend one video to you or another. And so this is a long way of saying, understanding the actual rationale and patterns of relationship between those texts, being able to see a little bit more of what it is that other people do with those texts would be really useful. Traversal paths have been used by Google and others to determine the value of links, but they haven't, in part because of incentives not to, shown us how those sort of determinations have been made. I think that in order to understand the utility of a given document, to your point, Alan, about SMS in India, being able to see the way in which people kind of navigate and traverse those things would probably be of a lot of help, to be able to see not just what the documents are, but the way in which they relate to each other as people sort of discover them. And so I feel like that would be a critical component, is understanding, and it may be a space, but it doesn't need to be, just something that allows people to see the way that other people have also kind of traversed it.
Absolutely, that's wonderful, and that goes right back to I think the very first thing stated by Frode was about what replaces the hyperlink, and in a way, outside of taking the principles of blockchain and not the realities, a replacement that included paths, as you were saying, and that's bundled in to the information presented, so you can go reverse, go forward. There's a lot of things out there already that are pretty similar, but that would be great to have as a primitive for the web.
Okay, Peter, I see you have your hand up, but Brandel's put my brain on fire. So one thing, considering your abilities, and Adam and Peter and Alan, everybody here. Well, so anyway, it doesn't matter. One thing that I think would be absolutely super important, and I think one of the core things for this community really should be how we can consult our own record of our own dialogue. I think that has to be one of the top things, because it's also generalizable. Two, how brilliant would it be and I don't mind if it's a web page, for crying out loud, where you go, and if you're a member of this community, basic accounts, what you can do, you can already the system will have extracted from YouTube the basic text transcripts. But the key innovations that we need, and these are so obvious, but I'm going to state it anyway. One of them is every bit of transcript will have a link to that moment in the video, so you can instantly see what was actually said. And also, let's pretend the text is in the middle, the video is on the left, but on the right or somewhere, if you have an account, you can annotate. So you can then say what was meant here, whatever. We all know what annotations mean. But because a really interesting thing that Zoom does with the video transcript, with the video file, it has the time in the lower right-hand corner. So if we have such a service, it shouldn't be that hard to have a little app or an applet or whatever you want to call it on our computers, where we can write live comments, or even, I'm being very stupid here, or even the comments, like Brandel, you just wrote something. Oh, okay, interesting. To do that, but too many things, plus my wife texted. Imagine if our text transcript also works in this world, right? So you have transcript, text transcript to the same points in time. That means that we can do things like this is important, or brilliant, or whatever we want to write, just normal text go to their webpage, we all instantly have access to that. Yeah, I mean, I saw, looking at the comments, I saw the link to Moment. I mean, in YouTube, you can do it really easily. It just is a lot of effort to do it, control click, but the transcript must have it as well, right?
Yeah, so in Apple WWDC videos, the transcript is actually a set of hyperlinks, so that you read through it and you can click on those statements and it will come to the place where they're saying them. In YouTube now, actually, the transcript, which is unfortunately a little impoverished in terms of the real estate it's devoted to when you look at the transcript in its entirety, also has that same functionality, but it's not presented in a way that would necessarily be discoverable. So if a video does have transcript and you click open transcript, it has the time codes, those are toggleable so you can turn them on and off. But when you click on that line, it will sync to that sort of approximate 5-second burst. So that there is a good sort of approach to it, but yeah, like I said, I think the real estate that is devoted to it matters a great deal, and they haven't figured out what it's for yet.
But I mean, if we had this amazing thing of it at the end of every recording also produces a PDF, right? Then we have a hard copy, so to speak, record. You can do your search functions in your PDF reader, instantly zooming about in it. And if you want to see the video, click, you go to that moment. It would be so valuable. If I was still in development mode, which I'm not going to be for a few months, I would definitely try to do that. But if someone here collaboratively wants to do that for a web service, that would be amazing.
There used to be a website called lynda.com, and then LinkedIn bought lynda.com, and then Microsoft LinkedIn. So now it's a Frankenstein and it doesn't exist anymore. But they used to do links in the script like for the longest time. And it was like the most organized video archive online courses like imaginable. Right now, the only other place that comes a little closer is Domestika. But even Domestika being new doesn't have a transcription with links that jump in between points of the video. And the problem is that transcribing, like Frode is saying, like a live transcribe after we finish a meeting, I feel like we still have some ways to go until that's good enough. And even when we get there, it's only going to be, for English and specific accents of English as well. And it kind of sucks that we're still in that point.
But the question is, what kind of documentation this is, right? I mean, by the way, no, anyway, that's another story. We still need to write books or articles, thoughtful pieces. That'll be one chunk in our knowledge universe, right? But this is just a chat. It may be an important chat where we agree on something, but it's still a chat. Even with a perfect transcript, and your friend Raphael, who's really helping me, he's shown how much, even if it's perfect, it's shit. Because speaking is not writing. We repeat our thing and it's messy. So it's never going to be perfect. So all I'm saying is that if we had access to go through a stack of PDFs on our computer, of course, as a database as well, but in that form, we could go back and, what was it Mark said last week? Quick, search, boom, watch the video, get the context. It will be so useful. Peter.
Okay, I dropped a whole bunch of resource links in the chat before, and the latest one is this system called Scrimba, which is an IMBA-based application for teaching and training. But the really neat thing is that it has a video transcript that is also synced to multiple editable documents and the result of executing the code at that point in time. So as the code's being worked on through the video, you see the actual live edit to the file, and you can pause the video at that point and run and fiddle with the files as they existed at that point in time. Then you can scrub backwards and the file state gets returned to the state it was at that time sync point. So it's very interesting because you have multiple documents that are being coordinated with the video and you can also take off and live edit and fiddle with them too if you want to. That's a very interesting system to look at.
I have to go. It was a pleasure, everyone.
Yeah, me
later.
too. I have to head out for elder care transport.
Oh, it's the time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
It went by fast.
It did.
So have a good rest of the week.
Yeah.
See you on Friday.
See you later, Peter. See you Friday. Brendel, I just clicked on that link. That's interesting.
Yeah, the reason why I mentioned it is because I helped make it, so I can talk a little bit about what went into it and some of the things that we thought about as building it. Because I think Scrimba is really interesting. One of the things that I think is really important with these is the cost of authoring, as you've probably recognized with transcription and paying by the minute or whatever it's ending up to be, is that these things are interesting. The WWDC videos are interesting, but when Apple does something, it's largely irrelevant because of its relationship to cost versus what normal people do with normal things. And so having the ability to create structured paths through things in a way that is incidental to the creation of the artifact, rather than something that it's a full-time job for our team of people to pour through and think out what would be the most interesting connections, which made me think that it would be hilarious to come up with a conversational markdown language that allowed people to say things within their conversation in order to punctuate and give automatic hints, in the way that speech recognition is exceptionally difficult, to your point, Raphael, when it is generalized. But when you have really specific things that you say, it's like, I think I was telling my daughter, that it's really easy to write a recognizer that is able to distinguish between yes and no. For the most part, those are hard to mess up because phonetically they sound so different. But so if you can come up with relatively repeatable things that you definitely know won't be used for other things in conversation, then you can use those to begin to automatically hint those things. You just need a cheat sheet next to you to remember to say them when they come up.
I see your hand, Mark, but I have to reply to this. This is so important. I have an Apple Watch. I'm so proud of it. It's so nice. The thing that I thought about in the beginning, which Apple have done so well, is different vibrations for different things, right? And also, I love the tapbacks in iMessage. I think that is an entirely new form of communication. I think it's insane. It's such a huge step forward. I feel weird when I have to write okay, right? It does so much, and it does it so well. So to be able to do that, and Brendel, I finally, because I don't use Twitter messages very much, I finally saw your 2 videos, including the voice one, which was really, really interesting. So yes, there needs to be some more analysis. And of course, we can do obvious things like if somebody sounds really angry, that can probably be found by machine learning. But to find what you're talking about now, like a voice tap back for a comment or something is brilliant. Yes, thank you. Mark, try to top what Brendel just said. I dare you.
Sorry. When I find myself actually sort of with a random conversation. It comes to recitative, but the thing a commonality I'm seeing here is is in a sense one of the things we're trying to pull together is the meanings, not the words, which is one of the problems with text speech. Well, they have the same problem just in different ways, because we don't write as we speak, but if you elide that part, we still have this thing that actually what we say or write isn't necessarily what we mean, and even if it was what we meant, it's not necessarily what other people hear or take from that after the exact moment. So in terms of transcription things, there's an interesting point there, because is the really valuable thing the verbatim words stated, or is it a degree of curation to pull things out? Because as we then know, it becomes actually expensive in some way, even if whether it's people or money, or which are arguably faces of the same coin. So I just thought, I thought that was quite an interesting thing, how it keeps going around. And simply because it was interesting that before that Brendel and Raphael were here, the very thing I was talking about was that in another forum, there's someone who's South Korean who's, he's watching some Vimeos that have been done of a community meetup, and he was saying, I find it a bit difficult. I'm looking forward to transcripts, but as far as I know, Vimeo, for instance, doesn't do captioning for free. And I was thinking, so what you really want, ideally, is a transcript, and one probably that could even be translated into your native language, because he's, Korean. Going back to Raphael's point about, not everyone is a native English speaker, and frankly, the English speakers speak a number of different languages as well. So, it is very much a Tower of Babel.
Yeah, especially Mark, you talk in very, very interesting phrases. But the whole idea of, in Zoom, we have started using the hands. We know that, right? If that is recorded in the chat transcript, that would be one piece of the puzzle. To have a speaking vocabulary, I think, is a really provocatively interesting idea, but also something as simple as like I said, having a little app where you just press spacebar or click somewhere when something's interesting for the future. I think that would vastly help curate. You curate live, and when you see that in the text transcript, it's not a problem to look up right before that, Mark, to see what caused it.
But
that makes me, this conversation makes me think of the graphic facilitators that, they, for example, for TED Talks, they create those
mind maps,
those infographics with illustrations and highlights and everything like that. And I feel like that's a lot better than having a data dump of everything we've said, because like you said, it's not useful because the conversation goes all over the place, right? So having a human curator compiling and refining and curating the content from the meetings, it would be amazing, but that's also to be automated.
And it's interesting too, you see this a lot with sort of tools that are supposed to provide facilitation, and often they don't know that polish because somebody's trying to present it and show it at the same time, and reality says it actually needs two people. And often not, and two quite different people, someone who can describe it,
yes,
and somebody who can actually use it with a high degree of facility, so that they show off at least what you aspire to do. Okay, it won't be what you do on day one. And doing that, so one person doing both those things at once, I don't think I've ever seen it done well. And the lesson I take from that is that the driving of something and the description of something are almost two separate streams.
So, Brandel,
sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say, I know this is public, but I'll say it anyway because I hopefully know what I won't get in trouble. There's something that Apple.
You want me to
makes...
pause recording? I'll pause recording.
Yeah,
you were just talking the importance of doing good presentations, but quite a bit more than that, just for the reference. But okay, so Brandel, because you're Apple guy, I'm going to ask you a few questions. First of all, to your knowledge, can a Mac app tell the difference between audio that is from me rather than audio from you guys? Because I'm wondering how that's interpreted internally, because if that is done, then everybody with a Mac in the conversation at least knows who the speaker is, because speaker differentiation is something that these transcript software try to do, and it's always awful.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely the application would be able to know. One of the things that I have spoken to, we use WebEx by Cisco inside Apple, and one of the suggestions that I have made is that we have exposed information, because obviously the speaker window goes green or green to yellow, and so the application has the ability to do that. So anybody with access at an API level to those streams would be able to differentiate. In terms of your own device, absolutely. I mean, the fact is that what you're doing is coming through your mic, whereas the other stuff is going through your speaker. So at least you versus them. And so if you were in a context where you were responsible for the code, or it was extensible in some manner, either because they can't stop you, like in web, or in something else, then it would be possible to create that differentiation. I've been pretty interested in Discord and thinking about whether it's possible to be able to hack it in order to say things like, how long does somebody speak? What is the pattern of which person typically follows whom? What are the sort of typical durations of rejoinders and things like that? Because I think that would be really interesting meta information to be able to kind of accompany a conversation.
So what you said there leads into the visual screen, because with the little box, now I have the yellowish box, but we also have our names in the lower left-hand corner, at least I have on my machine. So if we had a screen reader, basically screen capture. It would capture all that information.
Does it show? It's like it's interesting what shows up in recordings and what can't. And so, for instance, I know in Zoom you can't change your name during a recording because we can't have nice things because some people will do bad things and write rude words or something, and just as a way of getting on. Which is a shame because I did find I was watching a sort of video recording of a Zoom, and it seemed to the people were there, the boxes were there, but not their names. And I don't know whether that's just a choice at the recording level or what.
Well, it's a choice of the host as well, show this or that. But if we could have an app that runs to do, because the script, that also does screen recording. But if we have an app that we tell it, the names are shown, the yellow bits means that's the person speaking. Suddenly you have a ton of useful metadata.
Yeah. I'm dying to ask a question of Brandel, go back to sort of what he's relating to earlier, but not specifically, and that is just that it's slightly off topic. But in presenting, I've tried to adapt to less wordy things, and I really like the idea of often just using a picture. The thing I found consistently impossible to do is I know the picture I'm looking for, but systems, things like stock libraries are not designed for that at all, because they're designed they normally describe objects, not senses, and often the picture you want. So the thing you want to do, you might want something that effectively is a point of hilarity about. So you might want to be trying to illustrate the unexpected, and that's even before you've negotiated how affordable it is and things. And it's odd, and it's not. And the point about copyright cost is not because I'm out to sort of break anyone's rice bowl. I mean, because that's absolutely right that you get paid, but it's a remarkably difficult thing to do. So there's this aspiration in your mind's eye. You know exactly the the presentation you'd like to make. Can you find the constituent parts for it? I find that incredibly hard, actually, and plus the fact you're probably doing it on the plane on the way to the meeting.
Yeah, well, internally at any organization, the kind of the stock art that people typically choose is about as bad as you would expect in terms of the quality there. There are exceptions where obviously companies like mine that make stuff have pretty good photography of those things, even and maybe especially the things that have already been released, because we need to talk about them and how to use them and that kind of stuff. That's pretty useful. We have, big companies, and you may be surprised sometimes, like University of Southampton, they actually have license agreements with various things, various organizations that have access to royalty-free images for those things. But unfortunately, sometimes having a lot of money means that you just buy a lot of things that other people can't. So that is a solution. I'd be very interested in whether like VQGAN could be an answer for some people in that regard, if they have the time to be able to kind of train it into something that they want to be able to use to be a prompt for something, though. It's one.
There's a flow issue. There's a flow issue too. So you're trying to write a presentation. I'll be as brief as I can, and you know that what you want is a picture, and you sort of know the picture you want. And then half an hour later, after you've been around the internet several times and probably in and out of Wikipedia and down several rabbit holes, you come back to this presentation. You've probably forgotten what it was you're trying to write. So there's an interesting aspect there. And maybe the answer is you park it and you say, right, picture goes here and describes what it is you think the picture is going to be. Maybe that's the way you deal with it. I don't know. I mean, I don't do enough presentations in truth to get into the groove of having a process, but it's always fascinated me. And I have one or two people I know who I'm always in awe of just how nice their presentations are and how effortlessly they seem to do it.
I just wish we could use SVGs in Keynote.
Oh, can you not? Wow.
No, it doesn't work.
Oh wow, that's unfortunate. That's interesting. I wonder why not. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about Apple is that, and this is public information, is that a lot of things is secretly on the inside are actually WebKit. So for a time on iOS, every text box was actually a WebKit view because it had the least worst way of editing text, and in particular, sort of rich text. And as is, I believe, Mail to this day is also always WebKit. It's just not one that you have the same access into for reasonable reasons. All you want to do is edit and manipulate text. But yeah, so it would and Apple basically, it's not that it invented SVG, but it invented the rationale for sort of integrating it into the web. And I know the guy who wrote our implementation, and he's proud of it. But yeah, it's surprising that it doesn't work I would be interested in trying to find out whether there's a rationale for that.
I'm looking at the apps here on the sidebar of Zoom.
Oh yes. In terms of that, yeah. I think there's a lot that you can do about understanding what it is that a transcript is, as well as understanding once you have things like text. Something I wrote a long time ago. I don't have any sort of trail marks of it on the internet anymore, but I was really enthused by the access to the YouTube comments, and trying to figure out, what the most representative comment was. So taking all of the totality of the comments. This is to your point, Frode, about the death of things. It was a Flash application using a Flash API that YouTube briefly exposed to be able to reach and read all of those comments, and then using something that I now realize was a Bayesian filter, but I didn't know the name for it and sort of made it up myself, to figure out, based on all of the keywords, what is the one that has the most average length, that has the most number of keywords. But then also being able to see what kind of, when certain keywords were positively or negatively correlated, and then being able to kind of traverse the graph of relatedness through that to figure out what comments were like each other, and then being able to do sentiment analysis to see whether things were positive or negative, and then being able to look at the structure of that to understand it not just as a collection of bag of words, but also as something that has a gently sequential kind of nature to it, and being able to then see whether, what kinds of things start arguments and what kinds of things end arguments would be really.
In doing that, did you have a sort of as it were, for want of a better word, a human counter analysis? Because one of the things I found when sort of looking at numbers of things, you said we can slice and dice these things and we get trends out of them. One of the things I find interesting when I was doing my PhD research, because I just had to read, part of it was literally reading lots of comment conversations and recording bits, but the process of reading them and extracting the information, because a lot of it's quite manual because it was so messy and there was no API, was that I realized that I actually got a much richer picture that often actually ran counter to my effectively purely numerical analytical extract. And I never had time to sort of go back into that, but it's always sort of stayed with me as a nagging doubt.
Yeah, well, so I mean, that's one of the things that I think is as an important insight into what it is that software does. And I really like, there's a lecturer, Scott E. Page at the University of Michigan, has a model thinking class, and he says that statistics isn't objective; it's just quantifiable. And one of the things that you observe sometimes is that your gut tells you something. So when and in the context of making matrix ranked choices for something like buying a car, you can sort of evaluate those things, and if the values don't come out the way you feel they should, then that means that there are some weights in the system that you haven't managed to kind of account for. And it may be that you can't, but it's an interesting clue and an indicator that is there something that you can do to make those things come into line? Because you have at your liberty, you have the ability to come up with whatever system that you want for it. Another thing that I really like, and I think I probably all even said it here before, is that software is just bureaucracy sped up, and that that means that you have the ability to create value systems essentially within those things that account for things in the ways that you feel like they should. A bureaucracy is, I think, hopefully a little bit more explicitly tilted toward some specific outcome, some sort of value. And I think that was a really interesting thing somebody raised before, was that the values that certain pieces of software have been premised on are like an invaluable sort of component to carry along with them in order to understand what kind of problem they were solving. So in that same sense, Mark, I think that it's an interesting invitation when you go like, this isn't reading the same way, like the numerical reading of this isn't reading the same way. Like what are the things that you're picking up on that you believe that the numerical or the software mediated system is insensitive to, that you're wishing to kind of include.
And it's the interesting challenge there too is, of course, that at the point when you realize that, to suddenly spin up the human side, if you haven't been playing from the get-go, that's which of course is why a lot of people don't do it. Plus the fact that I've come to see that so reading data is something a lot of people don't like. So in other words, it's a non-normative skill.
I have to wind down for 1:30. But I'm going to look into a little bit more transcription services. I have a free account with Otter amongst others. So I'm just going to upload and see how that goes. But I do think we really need to reinvent how we have the dialogue of what to do, because in these communities over the year, so it often gets bogged down in what are we doing? And, you know, we need to write and share and edit. We need to put some normal keyboard muscle into it, I think, at least partly, just to be controversial.
Yeah. Yeah, for my part, I'm really fascinated by the idea of trying to create those bullet-pointed slides for a moment in time by trying to not just take the transcript and then strip out the words that are uniquely relevant to a specific body of text in order to make sure that those can be the most representative pieces at that time. I mean, unfortunately, you don't have the ability to see the text that isn't there if there's a summary word that describes all the totality of the text in a given sort of 5-minute window. But at the very least, you can say, what are the few words that best describe what was said at this particular moment, in contrast to the rest? You know, everybody is familiar with term frequency, inverse document frequency, or no? It's pretty straightforward. You look at the set of words that are said in something, and then you compare to another standard corpus. You know, the typical thing in English being that you know the commonest 100 English words are rarely a relevant signal for being able to understand what it is that a given document is about, because we use the all the time, and so it doesn't really tell us anything. So and inverse document frequency is the idea that you can contrast that with a general corpus in order to figure out, well, is this word coming up any more than this other word in here? And so then you can normalize it against specific domains. But you could do it against a given document itself, so that you can say, what is the word that occurs most here versus there? And so then you might be able to create something that can summarize. So yeah, it'd be fun.
So on Thursday is the official launch of the Future of Text Volume 2, day before our next meeting. I think we should use the few remaining meetings we have this year to figure out how to make the absolutely most readable, accessible record of our own dialogue. I think that would, what you just said there, Brenda, I could imagine one of the outputs being a PDF for the front page is that, you know, go in for the rest if you want, and everything is linked to watch it online, but at least you have this document that has this basic analysis, and how it's showed will be interesting. Some will be sentence, some will be different graphical representations of how those words were used, because the really fun thing is we can throw a couple of years worth of dialogues into this. So it would be relative to the dialogue for other meetings. You know, what was unique about this meeting rather than that meeting, rather than the average meetings and stuff like that. And
it's also a useful constraint with a very small c, in that rather than try and put one's arms around the entire world, is to say, well, look, well, within this corpus, you know, can we surface these things? You know, if we could find them, can we actually present them in a way that actually anyone, bar very few people, can usefully use? So I think all those are really interesting sort of challenges as well along the way.
Writing this down.
What time on Thursday?
Oh, we're not doing anything on Thursday. It's
oh, I see. Just the book. Like, fine. Well,
there is a summit of the book. Let me just look here. It's at 3 o'clock. I'm on a panel discussion with Vint and Ismail,
That's fine. I just thought I marked in the diary in case there was some existential crisis and you needed sort of just a few spare hands lurking in the shadows.
I'm not sure if it's open, but if it was, that would be nice. But it's basically, we're just going to be saying, future of text, visual meta, future of text, visual meta again and again. And that's basically it. Oh, by the way, there's a book. But
this is your future in a book already.
It is, yes, it is a dated, it is a point in time. But yeah, let's figure out how to make, somebody may watch this in a year or two, this conversation, somebody without a life. So let's make it as painless as possible for them to find the relevant bits of our stuff. Look forward to Friday, guys. This is
right.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.